Hello and welcome to this brand new edition of Global Lens on News9 Live with me, Neha Khanna. As always, we have a packed show for you. Let's get started with our big focus. China today rolled out the red carpet for Russian President Vladimir Putin, who is on a two-day state visit to the country that has emerged as one of Moscow's closest strategic allies, especially since the Russian invasion of Ukraine began over 2 years ago. Chinese President Xi Jinping and his Russian counterpart pledged to deepen their strategic partnership when they met in Beijing today, in a stark show of their growing alignment as Moscow's troops advance in Ukraine. Putin, whose delegation includes top defense and security officials, was welcomed by Xi Jinping to Beijing's Great Hall of the People with full military pageantry. A joint statement released by the two leaders laid out their country's alignment on a host of issues, including energy, trade, security and geopolitics, with specific references to Ukraine, Taiwan and the conflict in the Middle East. The visit, Putin's symbolic first overseas trip since starting a new term as Russia's president last week, is the latest sign of strengthening bilateral ties as the two leaders bring their countries closer in the face of heavy friction with the West. The statement proclaimed that China-Russia relations have stood the test of rapid changes in the world, demonstrating strength and stability, and are experiencing the best period in their history. The two leaders called each other priority partners. Putin, whose country's economy has become increasingly reliant on China since his February 2022 invasion of Ukraine, hailed the two countries' practical cooperation in his meetings with Xi, noting their record bilateral trade last year while stressing the importance of bolstering energy, industrial and agricultural cooperation. This meeting was Putin and Xi's fourth time speaking face-to-face since Russia launched its invasion of Ukraine. And just weeks prior to the beginning of the war, Russia and China had declared a no-limits partnership on the sidelines of the Winter Olympics in Beijing. This state visit comes amid mounting international concern about the direction of the war in Ukraine, amid delays in the delivery of aid and weapons to Kiev, and as Russia's economy and defense complex appears largely unscathed by Western sanctions. US officials say the resilience displayed by the Russian economy in the face of the sanctions is largely thanks to Chinese support. Putin says he and his Chinese counterpart will discuss the war in Ukraine in informal talks later today. Russia's newly appointed Defence Minister, Andrei Belousov, and his predecessor, Sergei Shoigu, who is now Secretary of Russia's Security Council, are expected to be in attendance. Putin's red carpet welcome in Beijing comes a day after Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky announced that he was cancelling all his upcoming international visits as his troops defend against a surprise Russian offensive in his country's northeastern Kharkiv region. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken was in Kiev just yesterday to reaffirm the Biden administration's support for Ukraine after months of congressional delay in approving American military aid to the embattled country. Blinken pledged $2 billion in foreign military financing and said some much-needed ammunition and weapons are being rushed to the front lines. Pressure has also been mounting on Xi Jinping from both the United States and Europe to ensure that soaring exports from China to Russia since the start of the war are not propping up the Kremlin's war effort. White House officials in recent weeks have confronted Beijing on what they believe is substantial support for Russia's defense industrial base in the form of goods like machine tools, drone and turbojet engines and microelectronics exported from China. Beijing, for its part, has slammed the US and accused it of making groundless accusations over normal trade and economic exchanges between China and Russia. But for all the denials of Western allegations, fact is Beijing has never condemned Russia's invasion. Rather, it claims neutrality in the conflict and has released a vaguely articulated 12-point position on its resolution. Ahead of an expected peace conference in Switzerland next month, Xi has called for peace talks that take both sides' positions into account. Today, Russia said in the joint statement that it welcomed the readiness of China to play a constructive role in the political and diplomatic settlement of the conflict, and that it is necessary to eliminate its root causes and adhere to the principle of the indivisibility of security in an apparent reference to their shared view that NATO is responsible for the conflict in Ukraine. This week's visit marks the two leaders' 43rd meeting in the more than 1 decade that Xi Jinping has been in power. Xi and Putin, known for their close personal chemistry, have steadily expanded their countries' diplomatic coordination and economic and security cooperation, as both have faced mounting frictions with the US and its allies. Even as Xi seeks to repair frayed ties with Europe and stabilize his country's ties with the United States, he is widely seen as unwilling to sacrifice his partnership with Putin, who the Chinese leader sees as an indispensable partner in reshaping a world order which both believe is unfairly dominated by the US and are seeking to contain them. This shared worldview was on display today as Xi Jinping, speaking alongside Vladimir Putin, slammed a lingering Cold War mentality, as he put it, and said, unilateral hegemony, camp confrontations and power politics threaten world peace and security of every country. The two leaders said they will deepen trust and cooperation in the military field by expanding the scope of joint exercises and combat training, regularly conducting joint sea and air patrols, and improving the capabilities and level of joint response to challenges and threats. Putin agreed with Xi's concerns about rising engagement between NATO and like-minded countries in Asia, calling for a reliable and adequate architecture of security in the Asia-Pacific region, in which there will be no place for closed military-political alliances. We think the creation of such alliances is counterproductive and harmful, Putin said. In the statement, the two countries also expressed very deep concern over what they describe as US military activity with allies that have a clear anti-Russia and anti-China orientation, calling the actions extremely destabilizing. Putin and Xi reaffirmed that there can be no winners in a nuclear war and it should never be fought. Analysts say it's not surprising that the Russian leader has chosen China as his first foreign trip since he was sworn in for a 5th presidential term last week. The 2-day state visit comes as their relationship reached its highest level ever. That's what he told the Chinese state media. Putin spoke of his interest in Chinese martial arts and philosophy and said some of his family are actually learning Mandarin. He added, in the face of a difficult international situation, our relations are still strengthening. But with the West growing increasingly impatient with the Russia-China alliance, Xi Jinping's hopes of playing peacekeeper so far unsuccessful. Analysts say the Chinese president will perhaps need to calibrate the risk of continuing to stand shoulder to shoulder with an international pariah who has in the past been described by him as a comrade and his dear friend. Needless to say, the West will keep a hawk's eye on this alliance. The question is, can it reshape the world order in keeping with the larger ambitions harbored by Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping?
I'd like to express gratitude to the chairman of the People's Republic of China and our Chinese colleagues for their warm welcome. We exchanged views with the chairman and found the atmosphere to be both comradely and pragmatic, with a strong focus on business. Trade and investment cooperation were top priorities in our discussions, as China remains Russia's leading trade partner. Last year, our trade turnover reached a record $240 billion, according to Chinese statistics, although our estimate differs slightly. Notably, Russian food exports to China increased by 1.5 times, reaching $7.6 billion, while total agriculture trade rose by 40% to $9.7 billion. We anticipate further expansion in this sector. Efforts to switch financial settlements between our countries to national currencies have deepened our trade and investment ties. The use of the ruble and yuan in Russian and Chinese commercial operation now exceeds 90%, providing protection against external risks on global currency markets. I extend a warm welcome to President Putin for your state visit to China. This visit, being your first foreign engagement since assuming your new term as the Russian president, underscores the significant importance you and the Russian government place on strengthening China-Russia relations, a sentiment highly appreciated by China. This year commemorates the 75th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic ties between China and Russia, marking a historic milestone in bilateral relations. Over these 75 years, our nations have forged a path of mutual respect and cooperation, setting an example for major and neighboring countries. Through concentrated efforts, our bilateral relations have advanced steadily, characterized by comprehensive strategic coordination and robust cooperation in various fields, including economy, trade, investment, energy, culture, and people-to-people exchanges. Additionally, cooperation at the subnational level and in other domains has flourished. These endeavors have made positive contributions to global strategic stability and the promotion of democratic principles in international relations.
All right. So how significant is this visit? How should we see it? And how is the West likely to view it? To answer some of those questions, I'm joined on Global Lens tonight by Dr. Arvind Gupta, Director of the Vivekananda International Foundation and former Deputy National Security Advisor in the Government of India, Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee, former Indian diplomat, and Professor Swaran Singh at the Center for International Politics at the Jawaharlal Nehru University. A warm welcome to all my guests for joining me on the show. I need to take a quick break. We'll be back in just a moment.
Start with the end in mind. You need to know where you want to reach. Every morning that we wake up, we are exercising our choice. The destiny is decided. The results are known that I'm going to win. Life of a goalkeeper is something which has always intrigued me.
When you come into a stadium, this is the highest level of pressure.
When I set out to do something, I decide in my mind that failure is not an option.
What you feel very strongly about, those are the stories to tell.
I have a mind which is absolutely restless.
Mind and body are entangled sensations.
That brings me back to golf. It's an amazing game.
This is not a perfect game. You only learn from them.
If you have a formula to a success, then you can replicate it.
I feel this is my first step. I'm starting now.
The winner is first born in the mind. I think, therefore I am. We are all about our mind.
World premiere every Saturday on News9 Live at 9 p.m.
Welcome back. You're watching Global Lens on News9 Live with me, Neha Khanna, and we are looking at the significance of Russian President Vladimir Putin's state visit to China. Let me begin with Dr. Arvind Gupta. Dr. Gupta, as I said at the start of my show, it goes without saying that the West and the United States in particular will be keeping a hawk's eye on this crucial visit. Now, you know, there are multiple reasons why these two countries and these two leaders have been a thorn in the side of the US for a very long time. There is constant talk about China's growing hegemony and expansionism, this, that and the other. But do you believe that today, now that the summit comes as the Russia-Ukraine war rages on, perhaps one of the biggest concerns for the United States and its NATO allies vis-a-vis China is the fact that this is one country that is, you know, sort of focusing on strengthening its ties with a country that is today otherwise an international pariah. And in the process, that China may be fattening the Kremlin's war chest. Do you believe that is one of the biggest concerns and grouses that the US has today vis-a-vis China?
Well, thank you for inviting me. Firstly, I'm not sure whether Russia is an international pariah. I think Russia has very good relations with not only with China, it has very good relations with India, and it has good relations in the Middle East. It has good relations in Africa, in Latin America. So I think this Western narrative that it is an international pariah to be shunned, etc., is not necessarily the correct way of looking at the situation. Secondly, Russia and China being thorns, or Russia being a thorn in the West's flesh. But I think the same thing can be argued from the Russian and the Chinese point of view also. They have regarded the US hegemony as being the biggest obstacle and impediment in the growth of multipolarity, in a growth of a world which is not dominated only by the Western narratives. So I think it depends upon how you look at the visit, where you, what perspective you use from. As far as the West is concerned, it is also to look within. How is it that today Russia and China have come so close? Who is responsible for this? So I think the narrative is far more nuanced than the West would like us to believe. And yes, the visit is very important. But as you yourself said, that this is the 46th time in the last 10 years that the two leaders have met. So in that sense, it is nothing very new. This is the visit and the strengthening of the comprehensive strategic partnership between the two is a natural process, and it has gained speed and traction after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. But that event itself is not simply that of the Western narrative that Russia invaded Ukraine. Of course, it did go there, but what led to that is itself a very important point of analysis. So I think these are times of major geopolitical churn. The Chinese have their own ambitions to emerge as a global power, and they have a relationship with the West, which is a strong economic relationship, and yet something which is very problematic for them, the US hegemony. The Russians, of course, have now done with the West as their the new Russian foreign policy concept, which came out in 2023, indicates. So they are looking for new partners. And I think we have seen in the last 2 years, all the sanctions, etc., which were placed on Russia, destabilized the whole world, including it had adverse impact on India as well. So we are in a new situation, and we ought to be watching not only just the West, which is keeping a close eye on this growing relationship, but everyone else, including India, and particularly in our region, so many things are happening. We also have to keep a close eye, but we must examine this visit and this great trend of Russia and China consolidating the relationship from our own angle and perspective.
Well, you've made a series of very interesting observations there, Dr. Gupta, and I agree with you wholeheartedly. Who is a thorn in whose flesh really depends on who you talk to. Because at this very meeting, the two leaders did talk about what they describe as a lingering Cold War mentality, which they believe needs to now go away. Of course, they see the United States and the West as a common adversary for multiple reasons. We need to take another quick break here on Global Lens, but we'll continue this conversation with our guests on the other side.
How do you fulfill that promise? Because ultimately expectations have to be met. If you look at the political landscape, is it really changing for women? And what is the inability of the forces that dead bodies surface, but not the living people?
That ink is a semi-permanent dye called the Indelible ink.
We are the sole manufacturers of this Indelible ink.
Don't try to repair something which is working. And if you have facial recognition, you can go vote in any booth anywhere based on where you are, and then it will be recorded that you can't vote anywhere else again.
Can we retire indelible ink and use biometrics? Theoretically, my answer would be yes.
This and more. Streaming on News9 plus news is now content. Subscribe and get free vouchers.
Welcome back. You're watching Global Lens on News9 Live with me, Neha Khanna. Let me now go across to Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee. Ambassador Mukherjee, Dr. Arvind Gupta made some interesting, observations in the earlier segment. He said it would be incorrect to look at Russia as an international pariah. That is a Western narrative, which does not necessarily reflect the reality on the ground. After all, Russia has a quote-unquote no-limits partnership with China. It has excellent relations with India and also with multiple countries in the Middle East. Today, when the two leaders stood next to each other and spoke, Xi Jinping slammed what he described as a lingering Cold War mentality and said unilateral hegemony, camp confrontations and power politics threaten world peace and security of every country. No prizes for guessing that, the references were all to the United States and NATO. And ironically, these are the very accusations that are leveled against China and Russia, even by the West. But when Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin come together and project this image to the world that they see each other as indispensable partners in an attempt to reshape the world order which they believe is unfairly dominated by the United States. The question is, how far do you think this alliance between China and Russia can really go in achieving that aim or objective that the two leaders seem to have?
Very good question, Neha. Let me try and explain the perspective from India's perspective. First of all, the West is responsible largely for pushing Russia, a very important European country and a P5 member, into China's ever-tightening embrace by its, I think, foolish policy of promising NATO membership to Ukraine when it was clear that this membership was not forthcoming, and thereby triggering a conflict which it would appear now Russia is slowly gaining. That's the first point. Secondly, there is, despite the bonhomie that I'm seeing on the screen between Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin, it is important to remember that Russia has many reservations vis-a-vis China because it does not appreciate becoming China's junior partner. It is too large, it is too important, it has a different perspective of world history, a different place in the world to become China's junior partner. And who is responsible for making Russia China's junior partner but the United States and the West? The third and very important point is that there are large places in Russia's northern areas where the Russians have been extremely wary of having it occupied very, very easily by its Chinese neighbors, because China is always looking for expansion, be it in Russia's northern areas, be it across the line of control in India or across the South China Sea, grabbing territory which belongs to its neighbors under the law of the Sea Convention. As far as the West looking at this warily is concerned, it is important also to remember that Xi Jinping, beyond the point, will not upset the apple cart with the West because China and United States are locked in an economic embrace. China and United States have a joint contribution to the world economy. China remains United States' largest trading partner, and beyond the point, Xi Jinping will not want to upset the manner in which the Chinese economy is slowly recovering. It is merely doing what India has done, which is trying to circumvent unilateral sanctions in a legal manner so that its economy does not suffer. We've done the same. In fact, we have actually helped the West by circumventing those sanctions legally so that the West can buy Russian oil refined in India from us. So I think that what is important is what Dr. Arvind Gupta underlined, and I agree with him, which is Russia is not an international pariah state. Russia is very important. It is time that the West understood Russia's importance and facilitated an end to the conflict. And from our perspective, we would see a closer Chinese embrace of Russia and Russia becoming a junior partner of China with great trepidation, because it's not good for world peace and it certainly is not good for India's equation with Russia. So I think all in all, the West has much to answer for, and the West should immediately take steps to try to put an end to this conflict, because if it doesn't do so, part of Ukraine will be annexed in any case, in which case it brings Russia much closer directly with NATO countries on its border. And since some neutral states have now joined NATO, it brings NATO into the absolute line of actual conflict with Russia, a nuclear conflict, and therefore brings a world war closer to the West and with Russia there. China is not far away and nor is India. This is not in anyone's interest. So actually these developments should be looked at very carefully from India's perspective, because we have never wanted Russia to become a junior partner of China, and now it seems to be the case very clearly, including from the photographs which are coming on the screen. Neha.
Quite right, and very interesting analysis there, Ambassador Mukherjee, because India will be looking at this summit also very closely. After all, this involves a country with which it has very long-standing historical ties, and then there is a country which clearly has been inimical to India for decades now. We will carry on with this conversation, but on the other side of a quick break.
Has Allu Arjun arrived, or he's just taking off?
If I really want to hit a moon shot, I want the moon.
These are big stories.
It's very unique to Indian cinema.
What would be the relevance of tradition?
I would believe that the first change has to come in the mind.
World premiere on the 18th of May, only on News9 Live at 9 p.m. Can the Trinamool candidate from Baharampur hit the ball out of the park?
50-60 दिन बहुत ज़्यादा बोल रहा हूँ, उससे पहले ही काम दिखने स्टार्ट हो जाएंगे.
Pitted opposite Pathan in Team BJP is Dr. Nirmal Kumar Saha.
The fight is not Adit Chaudhary and Nirmal Saha. The fight between Modi versus Rahul Gandhi.
Yusuf Pathan and Nirmal Saha, two professionals who have switched to politics, are taking on Congress leader Adhir Ranjan Chaudhary. Can one of the first-time politicians end his winning streak?
This and more. Streaming on News9 Plus. Subscribe and get free vouchers.
I don't think anybody has isolated Ajit Dada Pawar. Ajit Dada has isolated himself.
That led to a lot of bad blood between the ruling partners.
It is not true. You know it very well, who these elements are, who these individuals are. And these are the very reasons why you see a division in the party.
Now this contest between Supriya Sule and Sunetra Pawar is really a proxy war between uncle and nephew, and it's being fought in the family bastion of Baramati.
This and more. Streaming on News9 Plus. Subscribe and get free vouchers.
The game of power politics has begun. The poll bugle has been sounded. Who will receive the death blow? Who will be checkmated? It still remains to be seen.
ये दिखाता है हर कार्यकर्ता का बुलंद हौसला।
This and more. Streaming on News9 plus news is now content. Subscribe and get free vouchers.
Welcome back. You're watching Global Lens on News9 Live with me, Neha Khanna. Let me now go across to Professor Swaran Singh. Sir, thank you for waiting patiently. Let's look at this summit from India's perspective. How do you think New Delhi is likely to view it, considering that this involves one country, which, as I said, has been, a long-standing friend of India, one with whom we have historical ties. Even in the face of Western pressure and sanctions, India continued to import oil from Russia. Some in the Western media have even accused us of contributing to Moscow's war effort in Ukraine. On the other hand, is a country which is clearly an adversary, with whom we've had very difficult relations that have particularly been strained since 2020. How do you think New Delhi is likely to view the tango, or shall we say this quote-unquote no limits partnership between these two countries, a friend and a foe for us?
Thank you, Neha. I think it's very interesting to look at how New Delhi is looking or should be looking at this bonhomie that is happening in Beijing between President Putin and President Xi Jinping. As you said, during the Ukraine crisis of last 2+ years, India has reposed its trust and confidence and showcased that it will continue to have a close relationship with Russia. Among other things, suddenly exponential import of energy has resulted in Russia-India trade going up from $8-9 billion to now $40-45 billion. So yes, India has invested in that sense in showcasing to the West that their pressures will not make India budge, and India will continue to be working very closely with Russia despite what is happening in Ukraine. Of course, many European nations have been beneficiaries of India exporting the same oil after this is being processed in India. But remember, we are repeatedly saying Russia would not like to be the junior partner of China. But that's a reality. Increasingly, the longer the war continues, the more vulnerable President Putin keeps becoming to President Xi Jinping's, benefactor gestures. Simple things. China's economy today is about 11 times that of Russia. And Russia would have never been able to survive Western sanctions minus endorsement and support from China. And we are noticing, as you opened your program, that West is even accusing China today of providing material support to Russian military, not only Russian coffers, but even Russian military in that sense. And this continuous push of President Putin feeling more and more dependent on China makes this equation nothing more than now a subset or a subplot of the larger geopolitical contestation between the United States and China. In fact, the United States is also indicating that they need China's support to put certain restraint on President Putin. European leaders have been much more expressive about it, asking President Xi Jinping to, somehow influence Russia to put an end to it. Of course, we remember Chinese had last year put up a 12-point program for peace. Of course, they did not become acceptable to Western nations because it doesn't start with a precondition of Russian forces withdrawing from all positions in Ukraine in that sense. So that is a non-starter kind of an initiative. But despite that disappointment of the West from that kind of peace initiative from Beijing, even today, Americans and European leaders are indicating that perhaps Xi Jinping could help them in putting an early end to Ukraine war. So fundamentally, that empowers, emboldens Chinese leaders, with which we have had difficult times now for 4 years since Galwan. And therefore, I think the question is very, very, pertinent here to look at how should India look at that increasing bonhomie and showcasing of that bonhomie between President Putin and President Xi Jinping. Putin now has his 5th term. That means this equation is not likely to change very quickly. He's got another 6 years term now. President Xi Jinping is in early part of his 3rd term. So, if that proximity is continuously growing and West is creating no conditions where there is going to be any disincentives for these two leaders to work together or sort of not work together, I think that is a matter of concern, not just for Western nations, it's a matter of concern for New Delhi as well. How do we manage to continue to sustain that balance in engaging President Putin and, of course, engaging President Xi Jinping is something that our media and, of course, diplomatic experts would be looking at. But I think definitely it's a matter of concern for New Delhi to look at very carefully how to manage its relationship with both Russia and China. And very quick point to close my initial remarks is this is also the year when Russia holds the presidency of BRICS nations, which are now 10 nations from 5 to 10 now. That provides President Putin another platform, which is where India can step in. India will be part and parcel of dozens and dozens of meetings happening under that auspices of BRICS nations, which is where I think India have to play very carefully all its cards that it has to at least keep in know of what is happening between China and Russia and how it can influence that kind of equation, not really becoming sort of antithetical to India's interests in that sense. So definitely, I'm sure India is looking at this meeting very carefully. The joint statement is being read, I'm sure, word by word here, what it means in terms of not just talking about mutual issues of trade, security, energy, but they're also strongly standing with each other, China for Ukraine and Russia for Taiwan. They are together talking of Middle East. I heard Ambassador Gupta say that Russia has friends in Middle East. They have friends in Africa. So, in that sense, whether President Putin is really becoming more and more pariah state, and whether in that sense it is becoming more and more a junior partner of China, despite celebrating that sentiment, is something that I think we have to look very carefully in New Delhi.
Very interesting indeed, your perspective on how India might view this summit. Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee, I know you have to leave in the next couple of minutes, so I will ask you this question, ma'am, before going back to Dr. Arvind Gupta. How do you believe India is likely to view this summit? A foe and a friend coming together, displaying great bonhomie and camaraderie and talking about a so-called no-limits partnership. Is this likely to cause concern in New Delhi? Because we know that China has been a thorn in India's flesh for a long time militarily, given the border dispute, given what happened in Galwan, given its growing expansionism in the Indo-Pacific, and of course not to mention that there is also a growing economic rivalry between the two Asian giants. Is this growing relationship between Russia and China likely in any way to be antithetical to India's interests?
Definitely. If one of the parties concerned has a policy of salami slicing our territory and is becoming very close to a very old friend of India's, it is a matter of concern. But more than that, it is important to understand that the India of 2024 has a very close and important strategic partnership with the United States. So we have to also balance our strategic partnership with the United States and our friendship with Russia, with whom our trade circumventing sanctions legally has resulted not only in benefiting India's economy, but also benefiting certain Western countries who have bought this oil from us. So we have to be very careful and to give reassurance to the Russians that they don't need to become, in this manner, a junior partner of China, that they should reach out to their other traditional friends, including India, and on the other hand, try to convince the United States that bringing Russia back into a multipolar world and into a relationship where the West and Russia can engage is not just good for Russia and the West or for India, but it's also good for international peace and security, because it draws away the prospect of a major war breaking out, because as Ukraine starts to disintegrate more and more, particularly in areas where the Russians are taking over, and Zelensky continues to argue for a peace conference where, on his terms, where Russia is not present, which is absolutely foolish, because you can't have a peace conference where the victor is eliminated and the defeated country thinks that they can have peace on their own terms. So it is definitely of huge concern to India. And the closer that Xi Jinping and President Putin come, even if the BRICS presidency gives India an opportunity, and I agree with Professor Karan Singh on that, gives us an opportunity to do a balancing act. How much balancing can we do with the relentless pressure that the West is bringing on Russia economically and otherwise? So it is a very tricky situation, and the only thing that can guide us at this point is India's core national security interests, which will determine our relationship with the West and our relationship with Russia, while fending off the Chinese on the line of actual control, fending off the Chinese efforts to take over our friendly small countries in the Indian Ocean area, trying to take control of our neighbors, trying to surround us militarily. This is a difficult and tricky time for India, and we have to tread a very wary path, as it would appear to me that the clouds of war are gathering, fortunately not on our horizon, but on European horizon. Yeah.
Well, that does certainly sound quite ominous. Thanks very much, Ambassador Mukherjee. Great to have you on the show. You've made some very interesting points. I want to take these to Dr. Arvind Gupta. Dr. Gupta, how concerned is New Delhi likely to be to see a very important friend and, you know, strategic partner like Russia going deeper and deeper into the embrace of a very problematic and adversarial neighbor like China, which has been making life difficult for India on multiple fronts? What is this tight balancing act likely to be for New Delhi? And I want to add another quick question, since Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee talked about this peace summit that's coming up next month in Switzerland, where Russia is not going to be present. You know, many are wondering, is India likely to attend this summit? Should India be represented at the summit at the highest levels? Because India is one of those few countries that have excellent ties with Russia and also has managed to maintain friendly ties with Ukraine. But then this is not a summit that is likely to go down very well with Putin, given that, well, his country is not even invited. Is this going to be a tricky decision for New Delhi?
Okay, so let me first say that I agree with the analysis given by Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee, that it is a tricky situation for India. Having said that, and you also, try to frame this question in friend and foe framework. Having said that, I would not take a very alarming view of what is happening. As Swaran Singh ji said, we must take the realities as they're facing us, and we must be guided by our core national interests. Now, if you look at the last 2 years, in fact, our relationship with Russia has improved quite significantly, as was mentioned. And even with China, though we have a very tense relationship, but our trade is booming. So I think in this changed world, countries are learning to balance their various interests and come out with their strategies. In fact, the way India should look at it is what is the opportunity for it in this whole resetting of the equations. And we have already cashed on some of those opportunities. Energy was mentioned, buying oil, etc. And our position has actually been welcomed, and we managed to create a consensus at the G20, and which was welcomed by all sides, including the West. So I think there are opportunities for us here. We have been working with Russia and with China at the G20, at the SCO, at BRICS, and now of course BRICS, Russia is heading the BRICS, and BRICS is also now evolving. So the Russians, to Russia's credit, I think they have not let their relationship with China coming in the way of their relationship with India. And a lot of Russia-China relationship is opportunism. Russia has no options, and the West is to be really held responsible for much of that has happened. But that apart, I think Russians are taking a long-term view of India-Russia relationship. And I think similarly, India should also take a long-term view of its relationship with Russia, with China, and with the West, and not judge one particular visit and in one particular event in a knee-jerk fashion. So I think India has been able to get that balance which has been mentioned, and with time it will only improve. And this year, if it's possible that Prime Minister will also visit Russia, and that will, I think, be a very good opportunity. And there's so many other channels and avenues which are opening up between India and Russia. And as was said, our relationship with the West also remains very strong. I mean, our role in the Quad is appreciated by the US and other partners. And we have kind of drawn the limits where we can cooperate and where we will not, like not joining the alliances. So I think today India can probably play that long game, and it should take a long view and not be panicked or be guided by knee-jerk.
Okay, very interesting. Professor Swaran Singh, as we wrap up this conversation, I want to ask you a pointed question. China seems very keen to play peacemaker between Russia and Ukraine, but I don't think those overtures are welcome either by Ukraine or the West. But fact of the matter is that India is genuinely seen as a country that can play a constructive role in brokering peace. So I'm going to ask you this question. Next month, when that peace summit takes place in Switzerland, do you believe the Prime Minister of India should represent the country at that summit, or do we risk alienating Putin by doing so?
Let me begin by saying, Neha, that if I look at the larger picture of India's foreign policy focus, where India's foreign policy has gradually moved from non-alignment to multi-alignment. For example, India is very friendly with Israel, Saudi Arabia, and Iran, countries that don't see eye to eye with each other. Should give me a kind of a hope that if India is invited, India is very likely to join in that peace summit in Switzerland. And now, what kind of invitation comes will also determine what kind of participation India will think of in whether it will be Prime Minister or it will be some official level participation or even non-official participation. There are all ways how you can, have retired ambassadors or, other people joining in some events. So I think in principle, it is likely to me. Also, let me say that most major powers today are witnessing a transition in their foreign policy, and not just India's transition from non-alignment to multi-alignment. Most foreign policies of major powers are becoming increasingly de-ideologized. Right. They are becoming increasingly transactional. Yes. So in that sense, India is sitting in BRICS, but also India is sitting in quadrilateral security framework, fundamentally trying to ensure it is able to pursue India's national interest. And India's national interest today is number one, to make sure on this rising economic growth rate trajectory, India is able to really hit upon becoming the third largest economy by 2030, the earliest, or maybe a little later. So looking at India's national interest, I think India would be definitely thinking of joining that summit meeting. As far as efficacy of India in terms of playing that role of peacemaker between Ukraine and Russia, I agree with you that I think India is one of those unique countries which have been so far able to maneuver or let's say keep a certain equibalance between engaging Ukraine and engaging Russia. And the fact that we could bring out 24,000 people out of Ukraine is evidence that definitely India
and let's not forget that, the Ukrainian foreign minister was here just last month and he said, yes, we want India to play a constructive role at next month's peace summit. And the Indian Prime Minister is one of the few world leaders who can pick up the phone and talk to Vladimir Putin and can do the same with President Zelensky. Not many world leaders can boast of that. Okay, on that note, thank you so much to all my guests, Dr. Arvind Gupta, Professor Swaran Singh and Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee for joining me on Global Lens tonight. All right, let's now move on to our next story. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has publicly been challenged about his post-war plans for the Gaza Strip by his own defense chief, who vowed to oppose any long-term military rule by Israel over the ravished Palestinian enclave. The televised statement by the Defence Minister Yoav Gallant on Wednesday marked the most vocal dissent from within Israel's top echelons against Netanyahu during the 7-month-old war.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was publicly challenged on Wednesday by his own defense chief about his post-war plans for Gaza, or the lack thereof. In a televised statement, Defence Minister Yoav Gallant stressed the need to lay the groundwork for alternative Palestinian rule at the same time as defeating Hamas. He said he'd been pushing the issue since the conflict broke out in October following Hamas's shock attack, but has received no response from the Israeli cabinet.
Unfortunately, this issue was not raised for debate, and worse, an alternative was not raised in its replacement. Indecision is in essence a decision. This leads to a dangerous course, which promotes the idea of Israeli military and civilian governance in Gaza. This is a negative and dangerous option for the state of Israel strategically, militarily, and from a security standpoint.
His comments mark the most vocal dissent from within Israel's top echelon against Netanyahu in the Gaza war. In a riposte that did not explicitly name Gallant, Netanyahu hinted that the retired admiral was making excuses for not yet having destroyed Hamas in a conflict now in its 8th month. But the Conservative Prime Minister soon appeared to be outflanked within his own war cabinet. Centrist ex-General Benny Gantz, the only voting member of the cabinet other than Netanyahu and Gallant, said the defense minister had spoken the truth. Gallant's criticism over Gaza echoes that of Israel's strongest ally, the United States. Washington has tried to give a role to the internationally backed Palestinian Authority, which wields limited governance in the occupied West Bank. But Netanyahu has refused this, describing the Palestinian Authority as a hostile entity. On Wednesday, he repeated this position in a video statement within an hour of Gallant's remarks, saying Hamas must first be eliminated before any move to create an alternative Gaza government, and demanding the goal to be pursued without excuses. Netanyahu has said Israel would retain overall security control over Gaza after the war for the foreseeable future. Though he has stopped short of describing this as an occupation, a status Washington does not want to see emerge.
And finally, reports say the suspect in Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico's assassination attempt acted alone and had previously taken part in anti-government protests. But the Interior Minister says that the suspect, who's now been charged with attempted murder, acted as a lone wolf, did not belong to any political group. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister's condition is said to be stable but serious a day after he was shot.
Slovakia's Prime Minister Robert Fico was in a very serious but stable condition after surgery on Thursday, a hospital official reported. He was shot 5 times on Wednesday in the first major assassination attempt on a European leader in more than 20 years. A local news website on Thursday said police had charged a suspect with attempted murder and that he could face life imprisonment. Fico was greeting supporters in the central Slovak town of Handlova when he was shot from point-blank range. Local journalist Dana Rendlova was reporting at the scene.
At first we thought someone had thrown some small firecrackers in the square. In that first moment, we didn't quite understand what was happening because we live, thank God, till now we were living in a country where we couldn't even imagine someone shooting at a politician in a square. So the shock came only afterwards.
The incident has spurred international condemnation, with political analysts and lawmakers saying it was indicative of an increasingly febrile political climate across the continent. Slovakia has seen polarised political debate in recent years. Slovak President Zuzana Kaputova spoke to reporters on Thursday.
To, čo sa včera stalo, bol individuálny čin.
What happened yesterday was an individual act, but the tense atmosphere of hatred was our collective work. Today, the newly elected president and I agreed to jointly invite the leaders of all parliamentary political parties to the presidential palace with the sole aim of calming the situation and rejecting violence.
The
incident has raised questions over Fico's security arrangements. The Prime Minister was accompanied by several bodyguards. There has been no official confirmation of the gunman's identity and background, but Slovak news media reported that the 71-year-old suspect was a former security guard at a shopping mall. An undated social media post by the alleged attacker was critical of government decisions and policy. Reuters verified the person in the video and matched images of the man arrested after the shooting. Since returning for the fourth time as Prime Minister last October, Fico has shifted policy quickly. His government has scaled back support for Ukraine while opening dialogue with Russia. And he has long been critical of Slovakia's mainstream media, refusing to speak to some outlets.
Well, that's all the time we have on this edition of Global Lens. Thanks so much for watching. Do join us again at the same time tomorrow. Meanwhile, we're leaving you with some more stories that made global headlines today.
Forever there are simultaneous election of parliament, assembly and municipality and panchayat. So that framework has to be given in the constitution. That amendment has been suggested.
Are you going to take away the power of dissolution?
I mean, it doesn't require any rocket science to do this. It's a simple constitutional amendment, and the idea is everything goes together.
The Law Commission has set the ball rolling for one nation, one election. Basically,